Welcome to Math with Mrs. Bibb. Today we will be simplifying radicals and working on operations with complex numbers. The first thing I would make sure to do is to look at a problem that's given to you, like these that are listed. My instructions are to simplify, which means I would not grab a calculator and find a decimal equivalent to these if there is one. Simplify means to take any perfect square out of the radical and write that radical in simplest form. I would check my list on the right to see if the number that's under the radical is in the list over here, and I'm so glad that I'm doing this because I see a mistake over here. That should be 81. 9 squared equals 81, because 81 is in this list over here on the right. So, make sure you fix that. And that tells me, since 9 squared is 81, that the square root of 81 is 9. Now, 200. 200 is not in this list over here. 200 would be between these two values. So I need to make a list of factors of 200, and I'm going to do that to the right. So that's what I expect you to do, is make a list of the factors. What numbers multiply to give you 200? 1 times 200. 2 times 100. 3 does not go, 4 does. 4 times 50. 5 will. 5 times 40. 6 will not. 7 will not. 8 will. 8 times, what is that? 1. No, 2, sorry. 16. 25. Now 8 quarters would be $2. And is that it? I think so. The next thing I would do is circle any perfect squares that are in this list. And what I mean by perfect squares, the numbers that are to the right of the equal sign those are perfect squares. So I'm looking for any number in my list that is highlighted blue. And 1, 100, 4, 25. Those are all in my list. Then you want to select the largest perfect square. And the largest perfect square is 100. And you're going to rewrite the square root of 200 with those factors. The square root of 100 times the square root of 2. The square root of 100 is 10. And 10 times the square root of 2 would be my answer. So to simplify the square root of 200, I would get 10 times the square root of 2. 75. 75, the square root of 75. The number 75 is not in that list. It is between these two numbers. So I need to make a list of factors of 75. 1 times 75. 2 does not go into 75. 3 times 25. And I think 5 times 15, maybe? Pretty sure that's right. Yes. I think that's all the factors of 75. Then I'm going to circle the perfect squares. 1 and 25 are the only two that I see in that list of factors. And then I am going to select the largest one, and that's 25, and rewrite the square root of 75 as the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. I left my Apple Pencil at school, so I'm trying to write with a stylus, and they're not very good, so please forgive me. I can write much faster with my Apple Pencil. One thing I wanted to point out is that I always put the perfect square first. So 25 is a perfect square. When I'm rewriting the square root of 75 with this perfect square, I put the perfect square first and then the other number. The square root of 75 is the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. And then the square root of 25 is 5. So my answer is 5 times the square root of 3. Okay, going on to number 4. I am going to simplify the square root of 96. If you will notice, it is not in this list. 96 is between these two numbers. So I need to find the factors of 96. I know 1 times 96, Okay. 1 times 96, 2 times 48, 3 times 32. I know 4 goes into it. 4 times 24. 6 does. I know 6 does because 2 and 3 do. So 6 times 16. 8 does. I think it's 8 times 12. 9 does not. 10 does not. 11 does not. And we're back to 12. So that's all of the factors. And my perfect squares are 1, 4, and 16. And my biggest perfect square is 16. I'm going to rewrite the square root of 96 as the square root of 16 times the square root of 6. The square root of 16 is 4. 4 times the square root of 6. That's the answer. Let me go back. I didn't circle my answers. Square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 200 is 10 square root of 2. The square root of 75 is 5 square root of 3. Square root of 96 is 4 square root of 6. And now let's do 375. I know 375 is not a perfect square. It would fall between these two numbers, 361 and 400. So it's not a perfect square. 1 times 375. 2 will not go into it. 3, 12, 13, 14, 15. I added the digits together and I got a sum of 15. So I know 375 is divisible by 3. 3 times 125. 75, that's the last two digits, are not divisible by 4. So that means that 375 is not divisible by 4. It is divisible by 5 because it ends in a 5. So 5 times 75. It is not divisible by 6 because it's not divisible by both 2 and 3. So I'll keep going. It is not divisible by 7. I don't think it's divisible by 8. Nope. I know it's divisible by 25 because 125 is 5 times 5 times 5, or 25 times 5. So I'm going to do 25. 15 times 25. I believe that's it. Yes. And then the perfect squares are 1 and 25. And then I will rewrite the square root of 375 as the square root of 25 times the square root of 15. The square root of 25 is 5 times the square root of 15. And that's my answer. 5 times the square root of 15. One more to go. The square root of 32. So let me write the factors of 32. 1 times 32. 2 times 16. 4 times 8. I think that's it. And then I'm going to circle my perfect squares. 1, 16, and 4. The biggest perfect square is 16. So I'm going to rewrite the square root of 32 as the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. The square root of 16 is 4 times the square root of 2. This is my answer. So one more time, I want to remind you that when it says to simplify, you do not want decimals. The only time you will want decimals is if it asks you to round your answer to the nearest whatever value. So no decimals here. On to the next thing. Okay, we are going to solve quadratics that do not have a b value. Let me tell you about that just for a moment. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. When b is 0, it would look like all of these equations you see here. And when b is 0, then you use these steps. So remember that. The easiest way to solve when b is 0 is to do it the way I've instructed here. Okay. Let's follow the steps on the right. First thing you want to do is get the x squared alone. I am going to divide by 4 to get the x squared alone. So x squared will equal 1. Okay. Then step 2 says take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared is x equals, step 3 says, do not forget to put the plus or minus on the opposite side of the variable. So the variable is on the left, so when I take the square root of both sides, I have to put plus or minus, and then the square root of 1 is 1. Let me talk about why. If you have x squared equals 1, in your mind you think, what number or numbers can I square to get positive 1? Well, 1 times 1 is 1. But is that the only number I can multiply by itself and get positive 1? No, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So my answers are positive 1 or negative 1. Either one of those would fit this description in this problem to solve. And the shortcut to write that is plus or minus 1. So that's the shortcut to write positive 1, and negative 1. And then this is my answer. One more thing I want to point out, no decimals here. You will not put decimals unless it asks you to round. So don't forget that. No decimals. Number 4 said if there was parentheses around the variable, add, subtract, then multiply, divide to get the x alone. And we did not have parentheses. We will not have parentheses until we get to number 10. So I'll do steps 1 through 3 for 8 and 9. Okay, so step 1 for number 8 is to get the x squared alone. I'm going to subtract 5. 8x squared equals, I don't like that square. (37 minus 5 is 32. Divide by 8, so I'm still working on getting that x squared alone. So x squared equals 4. Take the square root of both sides. That's what step 2 says. Take the square root of both sides once your x squared is alone. Step 3 says don't forget the plus or minus. So the square root of x squared is x equals plus or minus, because I can square a positive or a negative to get 4, and that number is 2. So x equals plus or minus 2. That's my answer to the second one, number 8. Number 9, I'm going to add 10 to both sides. So 14x squared equals 56. Then I'm going to divide by 14. So x squared will equal 4. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And x will equal plus or minus 2. And that's my answer to number 9. Number 10, what I'm trying to get alone is this. And on number 13, I'm trying to get this alone. And on number 14, I'm trying to get this alone. So get the x squared alone. That's what is squared, is that x plus 1, 2x plus 3, and x plus 2. So don't forget that you're trying to get your x squared alone. To do that, I'm going to get rid of this 5 first by adding 5. So 7 times the quantity x plus 1 squared equals 63. Then I'm going to divide by 7. So the quantity x plus 1 squared equals 9. Then I'm on step 3. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So x plus 1, because the square root of x plus 1 squared is x plus 1, equals, don't forget the plus or minus, and the square root of 9, excuse me, is 3. Now I'm going to subtract 1 to the other side. X equals negative 1 plus or minus 3. Now, if this, the 3, contained a radical or a complex number, then you could stop. But since both of these are real numbers, I have to actually find both answers. So let me go over here to do that. X equals negative 1 plus 3, and x equals negative 1 minus 3. So my two answers, negative 1 plus 3 is positive 2, negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. Those are my two answers. And I could or should put them in a solution set. If you don't, it's fine. I just like to include those braces so that you see what a solution set looks like. Negative 4 and positive 2 are the solutions. Negative 4 and positive 2 are the roots. Negative 4 and positive 2 are the zeros. And one more time, -4 and +2 are the x-intercepts. So that's where this parabola, because this is a quadratic, would cross the x-axis at -4 and +2. For number 11, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. 3x squared will equal 100. I'm going to divide by 3. X squared will equal 100 divided by 3. Then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So x will equal plus or minus the square root of 100, because I want to separate that, divided by the square root of 3. Now, two things. 100 is a perfect square, so I'd have plus or minus the square root of, the square root of 100 is 10, divided by the square root of 3, and then we cannot have a radical in the denominator to be simplified. So I need to rationalize the denominator. I need to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the square root of 3. So my final answer is going to be plus or minus 10 times the square root of 3 divided by, and let's talk about what's going to be in the denominator. The square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 9. What's the square root of 9? 3. So my final answer is plus or minus 10 times the square root of 3 over 3. Remember, that's called rationalizing the denominator. I would write that down because it's easy to forget what that process is called. And you will find when you take trig and pre-calc that you will rationalize the numerator. Your instructions will tell you if that's what they want you to do. For now, every problem that I ask you to do, to be simplified, you cannot have a radical in the denominator. On to number 12. I'm going to add 5. So 7x squared will equal 56. I'm going to divide by 7. I'm going to go over here. So x squared will equal 8. As it says in step 2 above, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So x equals, step 3 says do not forget the plus or minus. And what I'm going to do, and hopefully you'll be okay with this, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite 8 as its biggest perfect square times the other number that it takes to get me 8. 4 times 2 is 8. And then I'm going to simplify that. X equals plus or minus, the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 2. So there's the answer to number 12. All right, on to number 13. My squared term is already alone, so I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So 2x plus 3 will equal plus or minus 4. For this one, I think it's best to go ahead and write this as two equations. 2x plus 3 equals positive 4, or 2x plus 3 equals negative 4. Please make sure to write yourself a note right here. I'm going to put a little star. So make sure you write yourself a note. Write two equations. And the reason you do that is because of your plus or minus. So write two equations. And then I know you all know how to solve these two equations. So I'll just solve them. Not really talk through them, but I'll solve them. And my first equation gives me 1/2 as one of the answers. And then 2x equals negative 7. X equals negative 7 over 2. So My two solutions are -7/2 and 1/2. Those are my two solutions. And we'll have to cram in that last one. Okay, we can do it. Okay, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. X plus 2 squared equals 17. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. X plus 2 will equal plus or minus the square root of 17. 17 is a prime number, so that means that the only factors of 17 are 1 times 17, and 1 would be the only perfect square there, so this cannot be simplified. Square root of 17 is as simple as it gets. Remember I mentioned up here that if you have a radical here or a complex number, you do not have to do these two problems like I did here and here, like I did these. This one is just a little bit different. All I have to do is get x alone by getting rid of this plus 2. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. Make sure to put that minus 2 in front of the plus or minus. Make yourself a note there. Put the minus 2, put the number in front of the plus or minus. So let me go ahead and do that. Minus 2, and I will draw a little arrow. Minus 2. So x will equal -2 plus or minus the square root of 17. And that's the answer to that question. Moving right along to the next slide. Complex numbers, any number that can be written in the form a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers and I is the imaginary unit. A is called the real part, so this is called the real part, and bi is called the imaginary part. A pure imaginary number, let me write that out. A pure imaginary number is where a equals 0. So when your real part is non-existent, that's when you have a pure imaginary number. Two facts to know. These are very important. I squared equals -1. If you see I squared, you replace it with -1. And the square root of -1 is equal to I. So if you see I squared, replace it with -1. And if you see the square root of -1, replace it with I. Okay, so moving on to the next thing.